The autumn wind cut through the Colorado mountains like a blade as I navigated the familiar streets of Colorado Springs, each turn bringing me closer to a confrontation I had dreaded for 5 years. My name is Colonel Maria Martinez. I am 34 years old, and for the past 15 years, I have served my country with honor. Today, I was driving home to bury the only man who had ever believed in me, my father, Sergeant Major Roberto Martinez, United States Army, retired. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, a modest 2-story home nestled in the shadow of Cheyenne Mountain. The American flag hung at half-mast, and military vehicles lined the street dress blues, marking this as the final gathering for a soldier's soldier. I straightened my uniform, the silver oak leaves catching the afternoon sun. My combat action badge sat above my heart, alongside ribbons that told stories I could never share. But as I approached the front door, a figure emerged that made my blood run cold. Patricia Martinez, my stepmother of 5 years, stood in the doorway like a sentry. Her black dress was immaculate, her makeup perfect despite the tears she had been performing for the military brass inside. When she saw me, those tears vanished instantly, replaced by pure contempt. "You're not welcome here, Maria," she said, her voice carrying like a slap. I stopped 3 feet from the door I had walked through countless times as a child. "This is my father's house, Patricia, and this is his funeral." Her laugh was sharp and cold. "Your father's house." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. "He died ashamed of what you became. A woman playing soldier, abandoning her family for some misguided sense of duty." The words hit with surgical precision. Behind her, I could see familiar faces through the window, my father's old unit, fellow NCOs watching this confrontation with discomfort and curiosity. "You have 2 choices," Patricia continued. "Leave now, quietly, and preserve what little dignity you have left, or make a scene and confirm everything I've told them about your instability." The word hung in the air like battlefield smoke. Instability, the perfect weapon against a military officer suggesting combat, had broken something fundamental inside me. I could see this moment had been planned, rehearsed, weaponized. I looked past her into the house where my father lay in his flag-draped casket, where his bronze star and purple heart were displayed with quiet dignity. The man who had taught me to shoot, to stand tall, to never back down from a fight when you knew you were right. But this wasn't my battlefield to choose. Not yet. I took a step back, my boots clicking with military precision. "This isn't over, Patricia." "Oh, but it is," she replied, already turning away. "It died with him." As I walked back to my car, I could feel the eyes of my father's brothers-in-arms following me. Some with pity, others with confusion, all wondering why Sergeant Major Martinez's daughter was being turned away from his own funeral. Patricia had planted her seeds of doubt well. I drove away from the house where I had learned to be a soldier, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside my chest. But Patricia had made one critical error in her perfectly orchestrated humiliation. She had forgotten that I was my father's daughter, and Roberto Martinez had taught me that every tactical retreat was simply preparation for a better position to attack. As I pulled into a nearby motel parking lot, my phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. It was from Chaplain Rodriguez, my father's oldest friend. The message was simple, but carried the weight of revelation. "Colonel Martinez, we need to talk. There are things about your father's final months that you need to know. Things Patricia made sure you never heard." The real battle for my father's honor was just beginning. I stared at Rodriguez's message for a long moment, then leaned back against the car seat as another memory flooded back, one that had haunted me for the past 3 weeks. The last conversation I'd had with my father, a call that had come through on a secure line at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. It was 0200 hours local time. I had just returned from a classified operation that had taken me deep into Syrian territory, my gear still reeking of cordite and desert sand. The mission had been a success, but the cost weighed heavily on my shoulders. When my father's call came through, his voice was different, weaker, somehow smaller than the commanding presence I remembered. "Mija," he said, using the Spanish endearment that always made me feel like his little girl again, no matter how many oak leaves adorned my collar. I needed to hear your voice. I settled into the metal chair in my temporary quarters, the familiar weight of exhaustion settling over me. "Papa, it's late there. Are you okay?" There was a pause, longer than usual. In the background, I could hear the faint sound of a television, the artificial cheer of late-night programming that couldn't quite mask the hollowness in his breathing. "I'm proud of you, Maria. I know I don't say it enough, but I need you to know that. Everything you've accomplished, everything you've become, it's more than this old soldier ever dreamed possible." His words carried an odd finality that made my chest tighten. "Papa, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Mija. I had a scare yesterday, a little chest pain. Patricia rushed me to the hospital, but the doctors said it was nothing serious. Stress, maybe. Getting old." I knew my father well enough to read between the lines. Roberto Martinez didn't get scared, and he certainly didn't make late-night calls unless something was seriously wrong. But before I could press him further, he changed the subject with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 30 years deflecting personal questions. "Tell me about your work. I know you can't share details, but tell me you're making a difference out there." So I did. I told him about the mission I'd just completed, speaking in the careful code we'd developed over the years, how we'd extracted 12 civilians from an ISIS compound outside Aleppo, how we'd gone in quiet and come out clean, no casualties on our side, no innocent blood on our hands. I told him about the little girl I'd carried out, barely 8 years old, who had whispered "thank you" in broken English as we loaded her onto the evacuation helicopter. "That's my daughter," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "That's the soldier I raised." We talked for another 20 minutes about everything and nothing. He asked about my promotion prospects, whether I was eating enough, if I'd found time to call my cousin Alina. Normal father-daughter conversation, except for the undercurrent of goodbye that neither of us acknowledged. "Papa, I should be able to get leave next month. I'll come home and we can." "Maria," he interrupted gently, "whatever happens, remember that you are my greatest achievement. Not my service record, not my medals, not anything else. You, my daughter, the Colonel." The line went quiet for a moment, filled with all the things we'd never been good at saying to each other. "I love you, Mija." "I love you too, Papa." 2 days later, he was dead. Heart attack, Patricia had told me over the phone, her voice perfectly modulated with just the right amount of grief. Sudden and massive, he hadn't suffered. There was nothing anyone could have done. But now, with Rodriguez's cryptic message burning in my phone, I wondered what else Patricia hadn't told me. What had she kept from me during my father's final months? What secrets had she wrapped in her web of control? My father had been trying to tell me something in that last conversation. The way he'd spoken about his legacy, about being proud of me, about whatever happens, it wasn't the rambling of a sick old man. It was the careful briefing of a soldier who knew his time was running out. I dialed Chaplain Rodriguez's number. The phone rang once before his familiar voice answered. "Maria, thank God you called." "Chaplain, what did she do?" There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Meet me tomorrow morning, early. Maggie's Diner on Academy Boulevard, 6 hours, and Maria..." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Come in civilian clothes. There are people watching, and Patricia's reach extends further than you know." The line went dead. leaving me staring at my phone in the growing darkness. Patricia's reach extends further than you know. Rodriguez's words echoed in my mind as I tried to process what that could mean. Sleep came in fragments that night, punctuated by dreams of my father's voice calling my name across an endless parade ground. When my alarm buzzed at 0530, I was already awake, staring at the water-stained ceiling. I dressed carefully in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain black sweater, and a worn leather jacket. No insignia, no military bearing, nothing that would mark me as Colonel Martinez. Just Maria, the estranged daughter returning for a funeral. Maggie's diner was a 1950s relic, all chrome and red vinyl, the kind of place where coffee came in heavy white mugs. Rodriguez was already there, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall. Even in retirement, old habits died hard. He looked older than I remembered, his once black hair now completely silver, deep lines etched around his eyes. But his gaze was as sharp as ever when he saw me approaching. Maria. He stood and embraced me, the kind of hug my father used to give. I'm sorry for your loss, Mija. Roberto was the finest man I ever served with. We sat across from each other, and he waited until the waitress had poured coffee and moved away before speaking. How much do you know about Patricia's background? Not much. Dad met her at some veteran support group about 6 years ago. She was volunteering, helping widows navigate the VA system. She seemed devoted to him. Rodriguez's expression darkened. Devoted to his pension, more like. Maria, your father came to see me about 8 months ago. He was scared. He'd started noticing things, mail going missing, phone calls that got disconnected. Patricia always had an excuse, but Roberto was no fool. He pulled out a manila envelope. He asked me to hold on to this. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you. Inside were photocopies of documents, bank statements, insurance policies, medical records, all showing a pattern of Patricia slowly isolating my father from his support network, redirecting his mail, even canceling his subscription to Army Times. There's more, Rodriguez said quietly. Your father had been trying to reach you for months before he died. Patricia told him you'd changed your number, that you didn't want contact with him anymore. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. That's impossible. I called him every month like clockwork. First Sunday of every month, 1,400 hours his time, Rodriguez finished. Patricia had been intercepting those calls. She'd installed call forwarding that rerouted your calls to a disconnected number. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The months of missed calls, my father's increasing sadness during our rare conversations, the way he'd seemed surprised when I called that last time from Ramstein. She was systematically cutting him off from everyone who cared about him, I whispered. Including you, especially you. Rodriguez leaned forward. Maria, there's something else. Your father had been working with contacts at the Pentagon trying to get you nominated for the Medal of Honor for that operation in Syria. My breath caught. That's not possible. The paperwork alone would take months. He'd been at it since you told him about the mission, building a case, gathering witness statements, calling in every favor he'd earned in 30 years of service. Patricia found out 3 weeks before he died, the stress of confronting her about it. The doctors think that's what triggered the heart attack. She hadn't just stolen my father from me in his final months. She'd stolen his final mission. Where are the Medal of Honor documents now? Gone. Patricia cleaned out his office the day after the funeral, claimed she was protecting his privacy. Rodriguez's jaw tightened, but she made one mistake. Your father was old school. He kept carbon copies of everything in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. He slid a small brass key across the table. He wanted you to have this. I stared at the key, feeling its weight like a grenade pin. There's one more thing, Rodriguez said as I pocketed the key. The funeral tomorrow. Patricia's been telling people you're unstable. Combat stress, she calls it. She's poisoned the well, Maria. Most of your father's old unit thinks you abandoned him in his final years. The anger that flared in my chest was white-hot and carefully controlled. Patricia hadn't just attacked my relationship with my father. She'd attacked my military reputation, my honor. Then I guess it's time to set the record straight, I said, standing to leave. Rodriguez caught my arm gently. Be careful, Mija. They'll believe her version unless you give them a reason not to. As I walked back to my car, I knew tomorrow's funeral wouldn't just be about laying my father to rest. It would be about reclaiming the truth Patricia had tried so hard to bury. But first, I had a safety deposit box to visit. First National Bank opened at 9, and I was waiting when the manager unlocked the doors. The key Rodriguez had given me felt warm in my palm, worn smooth by my father's fingers over the months he'd been preparing for this moment. The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected, filled with manila folders organized with military precision. My father's handwriting labeled each one: Maria's commendations, Pentagon correspondence, Patricia evidence, and at the bottom a thick envelope marked Para mi hija valiant for my brave daughter. My hands trembled as I opened that final envelope first. Inside was a letter written in my father's careful script, dated 2 weeks before his death. My querida Maria, if you are reading this, then Patricia has succeeded in keeping us apart. I want you to know that every day we didn't speak was torture for me. Patricia told me you were ashamed of your old man. That success had made you forget where you came from. I should have trusted the daughter I raised. In this box, you'll find everything you need to know the truth about Patricia and everything you need to claim what is rightfully yours. You saved 12 lives in Syria, Mija. The Medal of Honor nomination is complete. Every witness statement, every after-action report, every piece of documentation the Pentagon requires. Patricia tried to stop me, but she underestimated an old sergeant's ability to work the system. I've been building this case for 8 months, calling in favors from generals who still remember Desert Storm. Your ceremony should have been next month. Instead, she will try to bury this along with me. Don't let her win, Maria. Fight for what's yours. Con amor eterno, Papa. The tears came then, hot and fierce. I pressed the letter against my chest, feeling my father's love reaching across death itself to guide me home. The rest of the folders painted a picture of systematic fraud that made my blood run cold. Patricia had been intercepting not just my calls, but correspondence from the Pentagon, the VA, even birthday cards I'd sent that never reached him. She'd convinced him I was too busy, too important, too ashamed of my blue-collar father to maintain contact. But the Pentagon folder was the real revelation. Inside were copies of witness statements from my entire Syria team. Staff Sergeant Williams describing how I'd carried 2 wounded civilians through enemy fire while calling in air support. Lieutenant Chen's account of how I'd refused to leave the compound until every hostage was accounted for. Captain Morrison's formal recommendation stating that my actions had prevented a massacre and potentially changed the course of the entire operation. At the bottom of the stack was a letter on official Pentagon stationery, signed by General Patricia Hawkins, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Sergeant Major Martinez, your daughter's nomination for the Medal of Honor has been approved for final review. The ceremony is scheduled for November 15th at the Pentagon. Colonel Martinez should expect formal notification within the week. Your pride in your daughter's service is well-founded and deeply shared by this office. General Patricia Hawkins. The letter was dated 3 weeks before my father's death. The formal notification had never come because Patricia had made sure I never received it. I sat in that sterile bank vault, surrounded by evidence of my father's final mission, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about a funeral anymore. This wasn't even just about Patricia's manipulation. This was about my father's honor in raising a daughter worthy of the nation's highest military decoration, and my own honor in living up to the sacrifice he'd made to see me recognized. Patricia had stolen our final months together, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that my father's death would end his campaign for my recognition. She'd forgotten that Sergeant Major Roberto Martinez had spent 30 years teaching soldiers that the mission always comes first. Even in death, he was still completing the mission. I gathered the documents carefully, reverently, like the sacred artifacts they were. The Medal of Honor ceremony was supposed to have been next week. Instead, I'd be attending my father's funeral, where Patricia would play the grieving widow, while the woman who should have been honored as a national hero stood in the shadows. As I walked out of the bank with my father's final gift, I knew exactly what I had to do. Tomorrow's funeral would be about reclaiming truth and completing the mission my father had died trying to finish. The Medal of Honor ceremony might have been canceled, but the honor itself was still mine to claim. The honor was mine to claim, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies, and I knew exactly where to start. I drove straight from the bank to Fort Carson, past the familiar gates where MPs still recognized my face despite the civilian clothes. The base felt like coming home, the rhythmic cadence of morning PT, the sharp snap of flags in the mountain wind, the purposeful stride of soldiers who knew their mission. Chaplain Rodriguez had texted me an address, Building 1532, his old office where he still maintained unofficial hours for veterans. When I knocked, his voice called out in Spanish, "Adelante, mija." He was sitting behind a desk that had seen better decades, surrounded by military memorabilia. A photo of him with my father in Desert Storm fatigues sat prominently two young sergeants grinning at the camera, their arms around each other's shoulders. "You went to the bank," he said. It wasn't a question. I placed the Medal of Honor documentation on his desk like evidence in a court-martial. "She intercepted everything, didn't she? Every letter from the Pentagon, every phone call, every attempt Dad made to reach me." Rodriguez picked up the letter from General Hawkins, his weathered hands handling it with reverence. "Your father was so proud when this came through. He called me at midnight, crying like a baby. Said his little girl was going to receive the nation's highest honor. What happened when Patricia found out? She went nuclear. Told Roberto that if he went through with the ceremony, she'd make sure everyone knew his daughter was a damaged soldier suffering from PTSD. Said she'd spread rumors about your mental instability." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "She threatened to destroy your military career if he didn't withdraw the nomination." I felt the familiar burn of controlled rage. "And Dad, your father was torn apart. He wanted the world to know what you'd accomplished, but he couldn't bear the thought of Patricia sabotaging your future. The stress of trying to protect both his daughter and his marriage. The heart attack was just the final casualty of her war." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parade ground where my father had once taught me to march in step. She destroyed him to control his legacy. Tomorrow, she gets to play the grieving widow while his real legacy stands in the shadows. "Not necessarily," Rodriguez said quietly. I turned back to him. "What do you mean?" He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an official-looking document. "Your father wasn't the only one working behind the scenes, Maria. After he died, I made some calls of my own. Old contacts at the Pentagon, people who knew your father's reputation and your service record. The document was a military funeral authorization, signed by the commanding general of Fort Carson. But it wasn't just any authorization, it included provisions for a full honor guard, 21-gun salute, and most importantly, the presentation of the Medal of Honor to the deceased's next of kin. General Morrison remembered your Syria operation, Rodriguez explained. He expedited the final approval. The Medal of Honor is officially yours, Maria. The ceremony can't be stopped now, it's already been entered into the official record. My breath caught. Tomorrow, at the funeral. Tomorrow, Patricia planned a simple graveside service, thinking she could control the narrative. She has no idea that half the Pentagon will be there, or that the honor guard has been instructed to present you with the Medal of Honor in front of everyone. I stared at the authorization, feeling the weight of my father's final victory settling over me like a warm cloak. He'd known he was dying, and he'd used his last days to ensure his mission would be completed even without him. There's one more thing, Rodriguez said, pulling out his phone. I've been in contact with your old unit from Syria. Williams, Chen, Morrison, they're all flying in for the ceremony. They want to be there when you receive the recognition you should have gotten months ago. The emotion hit me like a flood, grief, gratitude, and a fierce pride that made my chest tight. My father had built an army of allies, a network of people who understood what honor really meant. Rodriguez, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you, everything, for keeping Dad's mission alive when he couldn't. Don't thank me yet, Mija, he said with a grim smile. Patricia's going to lose her mind tomorrow when she realizes what's happening. She'll try to stop it, to create a scene, to turn your moment of honor into chaos. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of command settling over me. Let her try. I've faced down terrorists in Syria. I think I can handle one manipulative stepmother. As I left his office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about burying my father. It would be about witnessing the culmination of his final mission, seeing his daughter receive the honor she deserved, regardless of who tried to stand in the way. Patricia had controlled the narrative for too long. Tomorrow, the truth would march in formation, and there would be nowhere for her lies to hide. But as I drove away from Fort Carson, the weight of what Rodriguez had revealed began to settle in. 5 years. Patricia had been waging this silent war against me for 5 long years, and I'd been completely blind to it. I pulled into a parking lot overlooking the city and let the memories surface, all the moments that had seemed like coincidences, now revealed as calculated strikes in Patricia's campaign to erase me from my father's life. The first Christmas after she married Dad, I'd flown home from Afghanistan, exhausted but excited to spend the holidays with family. When I arrived, Patricia answered the door with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Maria, I'm so sorry," she'd said, her voice perfectly pitched with regret. "Your father had to rush to the hospital this morning. His blood pressure spiked terribly. The doctors said any excitement could be dangerous." I'd spent Christmas Day in a hotel room, calling every hour to check on him, while Patricia fed me updates about his fragile condition. It wasn't until months later that I learned from Rodriguez that my father had been perfectly healthy that Christmas. Patricia had drugged his morning coffee to create the emergency that kept me away. Then there was my promotion to lieutenant colonel. I'd called the house, bursting with pride, wanting to share the news. Patricia had answered, her voice heavy with manufactured concern. "Maria, sweetheart, your father's been having memory issues lately. The doctors think it might be early dementia. He gets so confused with military talk. It just agitates him terribly." I'd hung up believing my own father couldn't remember who I was, that my achievements only caused him pain. The truth was that Patricia had been screening every call, intercepting every letter, feeding him lies about my supposed indifference while feeding me lies about his supposed decline. But perhaps the cruelest manipulation had been the Purple Heart incident. 2 years ago, I'd been wounded by an IED in Syria, the same operation that would later earn me the Medal of Honor recommendation. Shrapnel had torn through my shoulder, and I'd spent 3 weeks in a German military hospital. I'd called home from my hospital bed, needing to hear my father's voice. Patricia had answered, and when I tried to explain what happened, she'd cut me off. "Maria, I'm sorry, but your father specifically asked me not to put you through. He said he can't handle hearing about your war stories anymore. It gives him nightmares, and his heart can't take the stress." I'd hung up believing my own father didn't want to know if I lived or died. The isolation I'd felt in that hospital room had been unbearable, wounded, alone, convinced that even my family had abandoned me. Now I understood the truth. My father had never even known I'd been hurt. Patricia had intercepted that call, just like all the others, weaving another lie into her web of control. But there was something else that explained Patricia's true motivations. In the safety deposit box, I'd found copies of insurance documents and my father's will. The original will, dated before Patricia entered his life, left everything to me: his military pension, his life insurance, his savings, and the house. But Patricia had convinced him to update it, arguing that a successful military officer didn't need her father's small estate. The new will left Patricia as the sole beneficiary of everything. My father's sacrifice, his lifetime of service, all of it would go to the woman who had systematically destroyed his relationship with his only child. Patricia hadn't just stolen our final years together. She'd stolen his legacy, his ability to pass something meaningful on to the daughter he'd raised and loved. But as I sat in that parking lot, watching the sun set over the mountains my father had loved, I felt something cold and fierce settling in my chest. Patricia had made one critical error in her 5-year campaign. She'd assumed that cutting me off from my father would make me weak, isolated, easier to dismiss. Instead, it had forged me into something harder, sharper, more dangerous than she could have imagined. Tomorrow, at my father's funeral, Patricia would discover what happened when you declared war on a United States military officer. She'd learn that some battles aren't fought with words or manipulation. Sometimes, they are won with truth delivered with military precision, in front of witnesses who understand the meaning of honor. Honor, the word echoed in my mind as I drove back to the motel, carrying with it the weight of everything Patricia had tried to steal from me. She'd painted me as an unstable soldier, a disappointment, a daughter who'd abandoned her family for a meaningless career. If only she knew what that career had really cost me. Syria. Even now, 3 months later, the memory of that operation burned in my mind with crystal clarity. It was the mission that had earned me the Medal of Honor nomination, the mission my father had died trying to see recognized. Operation Nightfall had been classified at the highest levels, which meant that when Patricia spread her poison about my administrative job, no one could contradict her. No one knew that, while she was playing the devoted wife in Colorado Springs, her stepdaughter was leading special forces operators into the heart of ISIS-controlled territory. The compound had been located outside Aleppo, Syria. Intelligence indicated that 12 American civilians aid workers who'd been kidnapped 3 weeks earlier were being held there, awaiting execution that would be broadcast as propaganda. The window for rescue was closing fast. I'd led a team of 8 operators into that compound at 0300 hours on a moonless night. The plan had been surgical in and out in 15 minutes, hostages secured, enemy neutralized. But plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. The intelligence had been wrong. Instead of 20 ISIS fighters, we'd encountered nearly 60. Instead of one building, the compound had been a maze of interconnected structures. And instead of frightened civilians waiting for rescue, we'd found hostages who'd been so brutalized they could barely walk. An explosion, a roadside bomb targeting our extraction vehicle, had cut off our planned escape route. Enemy reinforcements were closing in from 3 directions. My team was pinned down in the main courtyard with 12 terrified civilians who couldn't move fast enough to reach safety. I'd had 2 choices: abandon the hostages and extract my team, or stay and fight with odds that made survival unlikely for anyone. I'd chosen to stay. For the next 47 minutes, I'd coordinated defensive positions while calling in precision airstrikes. When Staff Sergeant Williams took shrapnel to the leg, I'd carried him and 2 wounded civilians across 50 meters of open ground under heavy fire. When our ammunition ran low, I'd breached the armory building, retrieving enough weapons to hold our position. The moment that had earned me the Medal of Honor had come when ISIS fighters broke through our perimeter. A suicide bomber had charged our position, heading straight for the building where we'd sheltered the hostages. I tackled him 20 feet from the entrance, absorbing the blast that should have killed a dozen innocent people. The explosion had thrown me 30 feet, leaving me with a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and the shrapnel wounds that had sent me to that German hospital where Patricia had refused to let my father know I'd been hurt. But all 12 hostages had survived. My entire team had made it home, and an ISIS cell that had terrorized northern Syria for months had been eliminated in a single night. The after-action reports had called it a textbook operation. My commanding officers had called it the kind of leadership that defined American military excellence. Patricia had called it boring government work. The irony wasn't lost on me. While she'd been manipulating my father, convincing him that his daughter was wasting her life in some meaningless job, I'd been risking everything to save lives. While she'd been playing the victim, I'd been living the values he'd taught me: duty, honor, sacrifice. The classification level had been both my shield and my prison. It protected the people I'd saved, but it also meant I could never defend myself against Patricia's lies. I couldn't tell my father that his daughter wasn't a disappointment, but a decorated combat veteran whose actions had prevented an international crisis. Now, sitting in that motel room with the Medal of Honor documentation spread across the bed, I realized what my father had accomplished in his final months. He'd fought through red tape, called in favors, and pushed the Pentagon bureaucracy to expedite recognition for an operation that might otherwise have remained classified for years. Tomorrow, at his funeral, that classification would finally be lifted. The Medal of Honor ceremony would require a public acknowledgement of the operation that had earned it. The 12 people I'd saved, the team I'd led, the enemy I'd defeated, all of it would finally be part of the official record. Patricia had spent 5 years convincing everyone that I was a failure. Tomorrow, she would learn the truth, that while she'd been destroying a father's love for his child, that child had been saving lives and serving with honor that no amount of manipulation could tarnish. The classified mission was about to become very public indeed, but I needed to be prepared for Patricia's counterattack. 5 years of manipulation had taught her to weaponize every advantage, and tomorrow she'd be fighting for her life financially and socially. I opened my laptop and began what I did best: intelligence gathering. Patricia Martinez, née Patricia Hawkins, age 52, born in Amarillo, Texas, divorced twice before meeting my father, no children of her own, which had always struck me as convenient. She'd positioned herself as the perfect widow-in-waiting. But it was her employment history that made my blood run cold. Before moving to Colorado Springs, Patricia had worked as a volunteer coordinator for 3 different veteran support organizations in Texas. Each job had lasted approximately 18 months. Each organization had been investigated for financial irregularities, shortly after her departure. Golden Years Veterans Assistance in Dallas. $400,000 in donations unaccounted for. Investigation closed due to insufficient evidence. Lone Star Military Families in Houston. $600,000 in missing funds. Case dropped when key witnesses relocated. Texas Heroes Foundation in San Antonio. $800,000 in fraudulent disability claims. Organization dissolved before charges could be filed. The pattern was clear and chilling. Patricia was a predator who specialized in targeting vulnerable veterans and their families. She'd refined her methods over years of practice, learning how to identify marks, gain their trust, and systematically drain their resources. My father hadn't been her first victim. He'd been her masterpiece. I cross-referenced her social security number with public records and found something even more damning. During each of her previous relationships with elderly veterans, Patricia had filed for power of attorney within 6 months. Each man had died within 2 years of signing over legal control of their affairs. Heart attacks, all of them. Sudden and massive, just like my father's. My hands trembled as I researched the medications found in Patricia's purse during her last hospital visit with Dad. The combination was designed to look like heart medication, but when given to someone with a healthy heart, it would cause exactly the kind of cardiac event that had killed my father. Patricia wasn't just a gold digger. She was a serial killer who specialized in murdering veterans for their benefits. I screenshotted everything, building a digital dossier that would make Pentagon intelligence analysts proud. Bank transfers, property records, insurance policies, all of it painting the picture of a woman who had turned widowmaking into a profitable business model. I hacked into my father's email account using the password he'd shared with me years ago. What I found there made me sick to my stomach. Patricia had been using his email to correspond with insurance companies, the VA, and his financial advisor, impersonating him to expedite the transfer of benefits. She'd already filed claims for his life insurance, his military pension survivor benefits, and had initiated the process to sell the house. All of this within 48 hours of his death, while publicly playing the heartbroken widow. But the most damning evidence was in her sent folder. An email to a contact in Nevada, someone named Miguel Santos, sent just 6 hours after my father's funeral arrangements had been finalized. Target acquired successfully. Assets securing as planned. Estimated total value $2. 3M including property and military benefits. Will transfer 15% as agreed once probate clears. Next target already identified retired General Patterson, age 71, recently widowed, substantial pension. Will relocate as soon as this situation stabilizes. I stared at the screen in horror. She was already planning her next victim, but Patricia had made a critical error. In her haste to secure my father's assets, she'd created a digital paper trail that would be admissible in court. Every fraudulent email, every forged signature, every illegal transaction was documented and time-stamped. I forwarded everything to a secure server and began crafting my own emails to the FBI's white-collar crime division, to the Colorado Springs Police Department, and to the VA Inspector General's office. Patricia's crime spree was about to come to a very public end. But first, she had a funeral to attend. Her final performance as the grieving widow, unaware that the federal investigators I'd contacted would be in the audience, watching every tear, every gesture, every lie she told. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about honoring my father's life and my own service. It would be about ensuring that Patricia's other victims, past and future, finally received the justice they deserved. The hunter had become the hunted, and she didn't even know it yet. As I closed the laptop, I felt a grim satisfaction settling over me. Patricia had taught me that information was power. Tomorrow, she'd learn what happened when that power was wielded by someone who actually knew how to use it. Someone who actually knew how to use it, and someone who understood that the most powerful weapons weren't always the ones that made the most noise. I glanced at the clock. 2,230 hours. In less than 12 hours, my father's funeral would begin, and Patricia's carefully constructed world would collapse. But first, I had one final mission to complete. I changed into dark clothing and drove to Fort Carson National Cemetery through empty Colorado Springs streets. The mountain air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of snow. The cemetery gates were locked, but that had never stopped a Special Forces officer before. I parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, moving through the shadows with practiced silence. Section 7, Row 15, Plot 42. I'd memorized the coordinates from the funeral program. Patricia had prepared the one that listed her as his beloved wife, and made no mention of his only child. The freshly dug grave sat open under the starlight, waiting for tomorrow's ceremony. A temporary marker bore his name and rank: Sergeant Major Roberto Martinez, United States Army. 30 years of faithful service reduced to a few lines of text. I knelt beside the grave and reached into my pocket, pulling out my most precious possession, the challenge coin my father had given me the day I graduated from West Point. It was worn smooth from years of carrying it during every deployment, every mission. "Hola, Papa," I whispered into the darkness. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come home." The tears came then, hot and fierce against the cold night air. All the grief I'd held back, all the anger at Patricia's manipulations, all the love I'd never been able to express, it poured out of me in a flood that left me gasping. "She told me you were ashamed of me," I said, pressing the challenge coin to my lips before placing it gently on the edge of the grave. "She made me believe you thought I was a failure." The wind rustled through the pine trees, and for a moment I could swear I heard his voice in that sound. "But I know the truth now, Papa. I know you fought for me until the very end. Tomorrow, everyone will know it too." I told him about Syria then, speaking in the careful detail of an after-action report. The compound, the hostages, the impossible odds, and the decision to stay and fight. The explosion that had nearly killed me, the Medal of Honor that should have been his proudest moment. "She stole our goodbye, Papa, but she can't steal this. She can't steal the honor you helped me build." I touched the cold earth beside the grave. "Tomorrow, when they present me with that medal, it won't just be mine, it'll be ours." The cemetery was completely silent except for the wind. But in that silence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years' peace. The deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I stayed there for another hour, sitting beside my father's grave and watching the stars wheel overhead. The same stars he'd taught me to navigate by when I was a girl. "I promise you, Papa," I said as I finally stood to leave. "Patricia will answer for what she did. The FBI will have everything they need by morning, and she'll spend the rest of her life in a cage where she can't hurt anyone else." I paused at the edge of the grave, looking down at the challenge coin gleaming in the starlight. It looked small there, but I knew it carried the weight of everything my father had tried to teach me about honor and duty. "I won't let her win, Papa. Tomorrow, the truth marches, and she'll learn what happens when you declare war on a soldier's family." As I walked back through the cemetery toward my car, I felt the familiar weight of command settling over my shoulders. Tomorrow wouldn't just be a funeral. It would be the culmination of a mission 30 years in the making. The vigil was over. The battle was about to begin. And Colonel Maria Martinez was ready for war. War came at 1,400 hours sharp, dressed in dress blues and riding in government vehicles. I arrived at Fort Carson National Cemetery 30 minutes before the scheduled service, parking where I could observe the gathering crowd. Patricia had chosen a small, intimate ceremony, or so she thought. What she didn't know was that half the Pentagon had quietly made their way to Colorado Springs overnight. Military vehicles lined the access road. Officers in full dress uniform moved with quiet purpose. A media crew from Armed Forces Network was positioning cameras. Most telling of all was the honor guard instead of the usual 6-man detail. 12 soldiers in pristine dress blues stood at attention near the gravesite. This wasn't a standard military funeral. This was something far more significant. Patricia stood near the front row of folding chairs, resplendent in black Chanel, playing her role to perfection. She accepted condolences with practiced grace, having no idea she was about to give the performance of her life. I remained in my car, watching as more officials arrived. General Morrison from Pentagon, Colonel Williams and Lieutenant Chen from my Syria team, Chaplain Rodriguez, and finally, General Patricia Hawkins, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, whose signature was on my Medal of Honor authorization. Patricia, the widow, noticed the influx of high-ranking officials with growing confusion. I watched her approach Chaplain Rodriguez, her body language shifting from serene grief to sharp concern. The service began promptly at 1,400. I waited until the chaplain had delivered the opening remarks before making my entrance. I walked across the cemetery lawn in full dress uniform, my medals catching the afternoon sunlight. Every ribbon, every decoration told the story Patricia had spent 5 years trying to erase. The combat action badge, the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and prominently displayed the Medal of Honor that had arrived by special courier that morning. The crowd turned as one to watch my approach. Conversations died mid-sentence. Patricia's face went white as paper. I took my place in the front row, directly across from her. Our eyes met for one electric moment, and I saw the exact instant she realized her world was about to collapse. The chaplain concluded his remarks and nodded to the honor guard commander. "Sergeant Major, the floor is yours." "Ladies and gentlemen," the sergeant major's voice rang across the cemetery. "We are gathered here not only to honor Sergeant Major Roberto Martinez, but to witness a ceremony 30 years in the making." Patricia half rose from her chair. "Excuse me, there must be some mistake. This is a private funeral." "Ma'am," the sergeant major's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "We are here by direct order of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Please remain seated." General Hawkins stepped forward, her presence commanding absolute attention. She looked directly at me. "Colonel Martinez, would you please stand?" I rose, my bearing erect, my gaze steady. Around me, whispered conversations began as people understood what was happening. "Colonel Maria Martinez," General Hawkins continued, "you are hereby summoned to receive the Medal of Honor, awarded for conspicuous gallantry during military operations in Syria." The words hit the gathering like a thunderclap. Patricia's mouth opened in silent shock. This wasn't just a funeral anymore. This was a Medal of Honor ceremony at a veteran's graveside. Colonel Martinez, while leading a rescue operation to extract 12 American hostages from an ISIS compound, displayed extraordinary heroism under intense enemy fire. When an enemy suicide bomber approached the hostage position, Colonel Martinez tackled the attacker, absorbing the full force of the explosion that would have killed 12 innocent civilians. General Hawkins stepped closer, holding the Medal of Honor in its presentation case. "Colonel Martinez, On behalf of a grateful nation and in the presence of your father's memory, it is my honor to present you with the Medal of Honor." As she placed the medal around my neck, I heard a sound that made my heart swell with pride. The entire gathering, except for Patricia, had risen to their feet in spontaneous applause. The truth that Sergeant Major Roberto Martinez had raised a hero, the truth that had been buried under 5 years of lies, was finally standing in the sunlight, wearing dress blues and a Medal of Honor. But the ceremony wasn't over. General Hawkins raised her hand, and the applause gradually died to reverent silence. Patricia remained frozen in her chair, her face a mask of disbelief and growing terror as she realized this was only the beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Hawkins continued, her voice carrying the authority of the highest levels of military command, "there is one more matter to address. Sergeant Major Martinez spent his final months working tirelessly to ensure his daughter received the recognition she deserved. His efforts uncovered disturbing irregularities that require immediate attention." I watched Patricia's face drain of all color. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the pallor of fear creeping across her features. General Hawkins nodded to someone at the back of the gathering. 2 men in dark suits stepped forward, FBI agents, their badges gleaming in the afternoon sun. Behind them came a woman I recognized from my research. Special Agent Sarah Chen, White Collar Crime Division. "Patricia Martinez." Agent Chen's voice cut through the cemetery air like a blade. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and suspicion of murder in the deaths of 5 military veterans." The words hit the gathering like an artillery shell. Gasps echoed across the cemetery. Patricia shot to her feet, her composure finally completely shattered. "This is insane," she shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. "This is my husband's funeral. You can't. This is harassment." Agent Chen stepped closer, handcuffs gleaming in her hand. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Patricia's eyes darted frantically around the gathering, looking for allies, for sympathy, for any escape from the trap that was closing around her. Her gaze landed on me, and for the first time, I saw her true face, not the grieving widow, not the concerned stepmother, but the predator who had spent years perfecting the art of destroying families. "You!" she snarled, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "You did this. You couldn't stand that he loved me more than his own daughter." The lie was so audacious, so completely removed from reality that several people in the crowd gasped. But I didn't react. I simply stood there in my dress blues, the Medal of Honor heavy around my neck, and let her words hang in the air like smoke from a destroyed target. General Hawkins stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Mrs. Martinez, your husband spent his final months documenting your systematic isolation of his daughter. He gathered evidence of your interception of calls, letters, and official military correspondence. The Pentagon has a complete record of your efforts to prevent Colonel Martinez from receiving recognition for her heroic service." Patricia's performance was crumbling in real time. He was confused. He was sick. "You don't understand." "We understand perfectly," Agent Chen interrupted, moving closer with the handcuffs. "We understand that you've used the same pattern of manipulation and financial fraud on 5 different military veterans over the past 15 years. We understand that each of those men died of sudden heart attacks within 2 years of signing over power of attorney to you." The words hung in the air like an indictment from God himself. Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish pulled from water and left gasping on dry land. "We also understand," Agent Chen continued, that you've been corresponding with an accomplice in Nevada about your next target, a recently widowed general with substantial pension benefits. Patricia's legs gave out. She collapsed back into her folding chair, her face a mask of absolute defeat. The game was over, and everyone knew it. But there was one more revelation to come. Chaplain Rodriguez stepped forward, holding a manila envelope. His voice was steady and strong as he addressed the gathering. Before we lay Sergeant Major Martinez to rest, he said, I want to share his final words, a letter he wrote to his daughter just days before his death, a letter Patricia intercepted and destroyed. He opened the envelope and began to read in Spanish, then English. My querida Maria, if you are hearing these words, then God has called me home before I could see you receive the honor you deserve. But know this, you are my greatest pride, my most precious legacy. Every day you serve, every life you save, every sacrifice you make honors not just our flag, but the memory of your father who loved you beyond measure. The tears came then, streaming down my face as my father's final words reached me across the divide of death and deception. Around me, I could hear the quiet sobs of battle-hardened soldiers moved by the power of a father's love finally delivered to his daughter. Patricia sat in her chair like a broken doll, her hands cuffed behind her back, her empire of lies reduced to ash and wind. The truth had indeed set us free. As the FBI agents led Patricia away from my father's graveside, her sobs echoing across the cemetery, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 5 years. Complete and absolute peace. Complete and absolute peace, the kind that only comes when justice finally catches up with those who think they're beyond its reach. 6 months later, I stood in the same cemetery, but everything had changed. The temporary marker on my father's grave had been replaced with black granite that gleamed in the morning sun. The inscription read simply, Sergeant Major Roberto Martinez, United States Army. Beloved father. He raised a hero. Patricia's trial had been swift and merciless. The evidence I'd gathered, combined with testimonies from the families of her previous victims, had painted a picture of systematic predation that shocked even seasoned federal prosecutors. 5 counts of murder, 12 counts of elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud. The list of charges had filled 3 pages. She'd received life without parole. Her final performance had been in an orange jumpsuit, claiming she was the real victim, that everyone had conspired against her. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours. The other families she destroyed had found closure. The Martinez case had reopened investigations into the deaths of James Sullivan, Frank Thompson, Michael Rodriguez, David Chen, and William Patterson, all elderly veterans who had died suspiciously after signing over power of attorney to their devoted caregiver. Justice was finally served, not just for my father, but for all of them. I knelt beside my father's grave and placed a fresh challenge coin on the headstone, this one from the Medal of Honor Society, marking my membership in the most exclusive brotherhood in the American military. Only 500 people alive held this honor, and my father's sacrifice had helped me join their ranks. The mission's complete, Papa, I whispered to the granite stone. Patricia can't hurt anyone else, and everyone knows the truth about your daughter now. The wind rustled through the pine trees, carrying with it the distant sound of a bugle playing taps from another service across the cemetery. It was a sound I'd grown to love rather than fear, not an ending, but a salute to a life well lived. My phone buzzed with a text message from Chaplain Rodriguez. Maria, wanted you to know the Roberto Martinez Scholarship Fund just reached $500,000 in donations. We'll be able to send 20 military children to college this year. I smiled, wiping away tears that were no longer bitter but sweet. My father's legacy wasn't just the daughter he'd raised, but the future he was still shaping through the lives of young people who would never know his name, but would benefit from his final mission. The military had offered me any assignment I wanted after the Medal of Honor ceremony. I'd chosen to return to Fort Carson as head of family readiness programs, helping military families navigate the challenges of deployment and separation. It seemed fitting using my experience to ensure no other family would be torn apart by predators like Patricia. I'd also started speaking at military family events, sharing my story as a warning and an inspiration. Not every battle is fought on foreign soil. Sometimes the enemy is in your own home, wearing a mask of love while planning your destruction. But I always ended these speeches with the same message. Honor isn't inherited, it's earned through choices made in darkness when no one is watching. My father had taught me that, and Patricia's betrayal had proven it. The medals on my chest weren't just mine. They belonged to everyone who had ever fought for truth when lies seemed easier. As I stood to leave the cemetery, I felt my father's presence one last time, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living part of who I had become. His values, his love, his unwavering belief in doing what's right regardless of the cost. Patricia had tried to erase his legacy by destroying his relationship with his daughter. Instead, she had forged that daughter into something stronger, something unbreakable. The truth had indeed set us free. And in that freedom, both father and daughter had found their way home. Standing in the Colorado sunshine, wearing my dress blues one more time in his honor, I whispered the words that had sustained me through every dark moment. Semper Fi, Papa, mission accomplished. Some battles end with victory parades. Others end with quiet dignity and the knowledge that honor, once earned, can never be taken away. If my story has touched your heart, if you faced your own Patricias or fought your own battles for recognition, know that you're not alone. Every family has its shadows, but it also has its heroes. Please share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear about the quiet heroes in your own life. And if stories of honor, family, and justice resonate with you, consider subscribing to Honor Vindicated. There are more stories like mine waiting to be told, more truths waiting to see the light. Until next time, stand tall and remember, your honor is yours to keep, no matter who tries to take it away.